Right, if everyone just wants to kind of pause what they're doing for the moment, just to kind of recap the approach that you need to take with this. Because I think when you step away, especially when you're learning new software, you can step away from something and then when you step back to it, it can get difficult, to say the least. But what I've done here is I've gone, that's my rested period, there's my other rested period, so it's got rested at the beginning, that we're looking specifically at this leg, yeah? So this tentacle is rested here. By the time we get up to here, it's also rested. Let's turn onion skin off, just for simplicity. Let's turn that off as well. So it's rested. Actually, no, let's keep it on. And then between that, it hits a multitude of other shapes. So I've got that dramatic pull there. So that's the highest point of its tentacle pulling outwards. I've got it whipping back. Can you see that jump? So it's going to go from there to there, and then there to there. And I'm matching it against the movement, these keyframes at the top here, that's what I'm matching it against. I'm timing the movement of the body and using the movement of the body and the timing of that movement to plan those key drawings. And then what I'll do is I'll start to maybe tweak some of these a little bit. So for example, this movement just here, okay? Let's say I'm happy with the shape, I'm happy with the drawing, but I feel like the position is off slightly. What I can do is by going into the peg and just doing a slight transformation on the peg, I can just rotate that out so that it's sitting kind of where I want it to be. Okay, so I can say, look, that's kind of better. That's a more suited position. So it starts there, but actually it's not where it was before. Yeah, I'm moving it ever so slightly, so it's in a slightly better position. So I've got that, that ability to kind of control things a little bit more. So that's what we're doing, is we're going into these drawings one by one, and we're just adding in those key positions. So I know that I've got lots of drawings to do in one place, so that's a good example here. If I turn onion skin back on, I've got one drawing to get from one position to another. So to get from there to there. Best way to do it is cut it and draw it again fresh. Okay, so that's what we're going to work through now, is just one leg at a time, draw not all of the frames, but just the key drawings. So I've got quite a long gap here between these positions. So I'm going to do one around 2/3 of the way through. And I'll draw this one in. So once you've done it, don't be afraid to just kind of go, all right, I've got the key drawings in, I'll move on to the next one. So I'm happy with this. I've got my key drawings. It's not perfect, but it's enough for me to understand exactly what's happening. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And because the object is more or less symmetrical, down here I can kind of look at it quite sensibly. Be like, yeah, all right, I get it.
Oh yeah. You can tell her.
Okay, right. So nearly there, nearly caught up. Roughly. Low value.
Things to do later. You can. Is that?
So that's now, so where I'm at the moment, I am now 2 of my 4 tentacles down. Okay, so I've done the key drawings for 2 of the 4. I didn't copy and paste. I hand drew them fresh every time. But I did use the other one as reference. And it really is a process of just knowing when to cut a drawing and copy and paste it, so when it's in 2 identical rested positions, or when it's about just drawing it fresh, you know, from the very start. So what I'll go in and do now, I'll do the other 2 and get those drawn up, and then we'll look at maybe some of the more complex control functions and start to sort of play with those a little bit as well. But yeah, just keep kind of working through it. We'll maybe do another sort of 10 minutes or so, and then I want us to everybody stop. We're going to move on to another component that we need to give some consideration to. How's everyone going?
For some reason, that's something. Maybe it's being saved like something I did before, and I can't paint it because I want to see.
Okay, so
I was doing something with that.
are you go to your pencil tool?
Yeah.
Are you hitting this to drop it down into the colour art? Okay, so what's happening when you try and do that?
So it's been like maybe no. Okay, now.
Okay, it's the gaps. All it is just you're not going back to close the gap. So make sure you go behind the paint tool, click the close gap or the stroke tool, and just go into it. Okay. So, Okay, right. I'm going to quickly put together the last two. Hopefully, as long as it doesn't go wrong. So it's long tentacle 1, isn't it? There we go. What's nice is I'm sure you're finding this already, is as soon as you start one, the others start to get easier because you've got reference to work from. You know, you can start to plan the animation with a little bit more speed because you can already see the other tentacles, so you kind of know roughly where things are going. Make sure you keep kind of manipulating the stage. You know, rotate the paper as much as you can. You know, it's just good practice to get into. Try and remember some of those kind of stylistic decisions, like the longer tentacles won't move as dramatically as the shorter ones because it's a squid and it's weak. You know, it's not got complex, like compound muscles or anything like that. So it very much relies on rhythm and a flow to keep that movement. So it's not going to be necessarily as dramatic. I mean, you can make it dramatic if you want to be dramatic, but for the most part, it's not going to be quite as dramatic. I'm just going to cover that one in darker. right, more left.
I'm just afraid that I don't know, that it's more there's no it's a good exercise. But what you need is you need to practice how you're gonna train them when you speak to them. Yes, people.
Maybe they've gone downstairs. Who knows? Fingers crossed. Right. Let's get this kind of done because we want to get through the last kind of bit. That was terrible. There's nothing quite as painful as repetitively doing a bad line, but it is really a practice makes perfect thing in this software. You also find if you're doing a bad line, I'm sort of teaching myself now, if you're doing a bad line, just rotate the canvas. You're probably just doing it the wrong way around.
This reminds me too much to my
Dear Lord, right, come on.
They didn't have to reopen it. I don't know. Yeah. No, what because you know because it wasn't very the people wasn't going. So they closed it. And then they can come to open it again. I think they got to reopen. I don't know if it was more rentals or kind of more. I guess it was. So you're going, which you're going for the first again?
Do you have this first yeah, but I'm not going with the smooth here. I'm going by myself. I sent to me the email address but I didn't get
Because you go to the festival and do you have a list and then you so they will be all
so I don't have any receipt.
just your name and your student ID which makers
So, what you should be nearing, because I know we are running out of time. Okay. So you should be nearing a point where you are starting to get something that is beginning to look like this. Okay, so you've got static elements, the body that's controlled, it's not moving, and then you've got drawn elements that are using reference from each other, but are still hand-drawn. They're just controlled in a new way. One of the hardest things to do when you're learning to do drawn animation, as you probably already know this because you've faced the battle last year when you did like paper-based animation, is going what we call off-model. So this is where when you're drawing something by hand, as it moves from one position to another, it warps and it kind of becomes a different shape. You know, it doesn't like you draw a circle and you try and make a circle hand-drawn move across a page. If you're going to redraw it every time, there's always that risk that it just becomes something else. It doesn't hold its character. We call that going off model. This process, this hybrid process where we use pegs to pin stuff down and then move it, means we're less likely to go off model. We can keep the control of shapes a little bit more and kind of keep a smoothness to them. There's one more thing I want to show you. I'm going to give you another couple of minutes to work through this because I can see some people are like twitching, trying to like figure things out. But I'm going to show you another way that we can kind of control a drawing so that it just works. Yeah, so it doesn't go off model and it doesn't warp or become something else. Okay, so just, another 2 minutes and then I'm going to show you how to stay on model, or one of the little tricks that Harmony allows to keep you on model. Like that. Okay, so what's missing? We've got... Bear with me 2 seconds. I'm just going to save my stuff, and then I want you to all sort of pause what you're doing. So we need you. Where's my drawing desk go? Yeah, drawing tools. Okay, so oh my word, yeah. Okay, so what I want to walk you through is just some kind of basic functions that will give you a little bit more control over what you're working on. This is kind of detailed stuff actually, and you might find it a little bit unnecessary. You might find it really valuable, actually. You might find that it's like this. It's something that actually really, really makes a difference. You might not. You might find that actually like, oh, this is too much. Like it's actually too much to do. For some reason, my drawing desk has disappeared, and that's really frustrating me. And I can't see view. Where the hell has my drawing desk gone? Sorry, I've just lost my drawing desk. Send them to a drawing desk, but it's not appearing. Come back. So what I'm going to show you to do is a technique that's called shift and trace, which is really handy. In fact, just bear with me 2 seconds. Everybody just go back to what you were doing, because I'm going to have to Google the new... We've got a new Harmony this year, so they've moved some of the buttons, which is always fun. As with all software, they just like to keep you on your toes. And where has my drawing desk gone? Aha. Right, they moved to drawing mode. Sorry, everyone, stop what you're doing. Come back. It used to be its own button, and now it's under the drawing mode, which is not. It's not always been there. So the drawing desk. This is kind of an interesting one actually, because what it basically allows you to do is have a little bit more control over the way that certain drawings work. So first off, last week I showed you the node view, not the node view, sorry, the X sheet or the dope sheet, which is a way that you can see your drawings over time. So this is the X sheet view just here after we've had loads of content added. So what I did is I went down to ST1, so short tentacle 1. I went to my X sheet, and what I basically did is you can right click and do it, and go drawing, mark drawings, or you can go this down here, send drawings to the desk. What that does is anytime a new drawing's been added, so anytime you've either cut a drawing or duplicated a drawing, so anywhere where those lines exist in your timeline, that counts as a new drawing. And what it does is it takes all of those drawings and adds them to the desk. And you can see all of the drawings just here. And you can see them over the top of one another as they exist across time. And when I highlight each one of those drawings, it will kind of walk me through them. Now I've got a duplicate because I've got 2 lots of rested drawings, so they're just there. And then I've got that kind of arc of movement as it exists. Now what I can do with those is I can start to kind of play around with how they relate to one another. So if I click this little button here which says Shift and Trace Enabled, what it actually allows me to do is take those drawings and lay them over the top of one another and actually see how they relate to one another. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is I can line them up and start to really kind of play around with how they actually work when you hold them against one another. So what I mean is, if you've got two objects that are supposed to be the same object, but they exist in different periods of time, so they're both a tentacle, but one's a tentacle in frame 1, and one's a tentacle in frame 2, you have to be sure that they look the same. Even though they've moved into a different position, they have to look the same. So what this desk allows me to do is select the drawings that I want. So I'm just going to deactivate all of them, actually. Select the drawings that I want to compare, which will be this one. Actually, no, it won't. We're going to do this one and this one. And then go into my manipulator and just compare them to one another. So I can start to hold them over the top of one another and actually compare how they work over time. So what I mean by that is I can start to think about, like, do they actually line up? So for example, are they the same length? So if I go tip to tip, are they the same length? Well, now I can see actually, no, they're not. So even though they flexed slightly, so this one's slightly bent, actually in terms of physical length, they're not the same. The drawings don't actually line up against one another. And if I go to this one and do a comparison, so if I do an end, I'm just going to draw it into position. This one, end to end, is actually a little bit closer. So if I flatten this out, actually, yeah, it would kind of line up and be almost the same length as the other drawing. So that's kind of okay. Like that one's fine. It's just this one that's a little bit short. I think this one maybe needs to be a little bit longer. And so the idea of shift and trace is it's just an opportunity to kind of ignore time and instead just think about objects. And what's nice about it, yeah, is it does actually line up the first one for you. So you can always have that as a point of like comparison. You can manipulate them as well. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend changing them too much. You want to just more think about like where they're positioned. You can change. You might not want to do this, but basically, if you want to, you can move them about and make some decisions about how they're designed. So, for example, like say I'm like, oh, actually, I'm not happy with this. I can go in and change it here in the shift and trace mode. So I can say, I'll just make you a little bit longer, and now you add up. So I know that the lineup doesn't work perfectly, but yeah, now I've made that a bit longer, it's a slightly better shape. So it's almost like we ignored the flow of time and we just think about them as a series of drawings. And any changes we make here in the drawing view will be reflected in the camera view. So I can see, look, my art layer, you see how the two have separated because I've elongated it in the drawing mode. I now need to go back and correct this color layer. So I need to I'll just quickly do a dump down. So I'll go right, send that down, go back to the colors. You can see it's reinterpreted it for me quite nicely there. And just to be super fast, I'd probably do this with the brush tool instead of anything else. So come up here and get my colors. So I can see it's the blue color mode. I need to turn on. Oh, it is on. Oh, it's because it needs to be off. Sorry. So I'm just going to colour that in quickly. There we go. And then I'll use the repaint tool just to go in and just kind of fix any bits that didn't quite work. So that lower value bit kind of needs to come in a bit further like that. So I can just go in and just correct it quickly based on that new information that's been added. So it might seem really strange, like why would you go in and then change all the drawings? But if you think about something like The Simpsons, there's a good example actually. The Simpsons and Family Guy and Big Mouth and those shows that use hybridized animation processes. If you're doing a hand-drawn head turn, you want to make sure that every drawing still looks like that character. You don't want it to change shape or change dimension. So actually adding the drawings into the drawing view and using the shift and trace is a great way to lay them over the top of one another and just say, look, this is the character's head length, head height and head width at straight ahead. And let's say they're going to like a 90-degree turn. If they've got, when they're at the 45-degree angle, that drawing, you want to line that up over the top of the first drawing and say, look, is it the same height still? Is it the same width? You know, I don't want it to warp or to become something else over time. So it's a really handy tool to use if you want your drawings to be really, really crisp, like really, really detailed. If not, you don't really need to worry about it too much. So we're at a point with this now where what we can do is actually get a rough idea of what the final playback will look like. So we should be able to sort of step backwards and say, look, it's only, stop the playback for a second. Yeah, it's only the key drawings, remember? It's not all the drawings. It's just the key drawings. We've still got in-betweens that need to be added in. But it gives us a fairly good idea of what that movement's going to look like. I've done a couple of things here. Again, you're always thinking. So I offset the movement of the tentacles. You notice the smaller ones go out further and faster, and the larger ones kind of follow behind a little bit. So even in key drawings, they're starting to feel different. But what I haven't had to waste time with, and this is why the hybrid animation approach works really nicely, is I didn't have to waste time redrawing that stupid body as it kind of moved, you know, across. You know, I didn't have to keep resketching it. That bit's fixed in time, and it's absolutely fine. Okay. What I can also do is I can get really, really clever with this, and this is the last thing I'm going to show you before we kind of get too into it. I can get really clever and start thinking about that bigger piece of movement. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to turn onion skin off for the moment. I'm going to turn my light box off, and we're going to look at this kind of piece of movement. And the focus of this is two things. First off, I'm going to show you how to see the path of movement, and then I'm going to show you how you view that as actual three-dimensional information. So the paths tool, when we're in camera view, is just here. It's a show control and hide all control. So I've selected just the main upper body. So go back to node view. I've just selected this top piece, yeah, the super important peg that controls everything else. When I click show path, what it basically does is it allows me to see the path of movement. And what's really nice about this is it actually shows me some of the key pieces of information, so key frame, like key state changes. So I can see that this is where the drawing ends, up here on this yellow point, and the pink one is where the information starts. And if I want to, I had already selected one, but you can click on one of the endpoints. I've got the transform tool that I'm doing this with, and animate is active. If I click one of the endpoints to activate it, and then hover over the actual control path. So hover to say the middle point may be here, because I'm not thinking middle point in distance, I'm thinking the middle point of time. So I can see the key drawings get closer together, so I know that there's more movement than maybe over here. If I hover over and hit P, it allows me to add a new path marker in. And then I can click and drag to manipulate that marker in over time. So now, as opposed to going in a straight line, I can actually kind of bring in some real control to this. I can even, if I want to be really clever, if I get to about here, select that body peg again, and say, right, at this point, I want to bring in a little tiny state change. And at this point, we're going to follow that state change through and really kind of tilt upwards. Yeah, so now I'm actually bringing in kind of more detailed movement that really adds to the performance stuff that was already happening. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. And then the last thing that I thought we could take a look at before I really just kind of leave you to crack on with this and push through it. The last thing is if we now go up to the plus. Actually, let's not go to plus. Let's select the body peg, double click the symbol of it, and just select Enable 3D. What that basically allows us to do is see this shape as a three-dimensional object. Now that does mean that we're going to need to reset some of our markers, because what's happened is, can you see it's now got a blue circle around it? That blue circle is a rotation point. So the best way to understand this is to switch to perspective mode, and we can see that our object actually exists as an element in three-dimensional space. So this is something most people don't always understand about Harmony. It's like you are always working in 3D. You might not realize it because you've got a flat camera and you're looking at things quite flat like Animate, but you are actually always working three-dimensionally. So that means that say you wanted one object to pass in front of another, you don't have to fake that, yeah, by animating and drawing one thing over another. You can physically move it around in three-dimensional space in order to create a sense of depth. So that's why that control parameter, when I switch to 3D, it reset itself. Because it's like, oh no, now you're moving three-dimensionally, you need to tell me a little bit more information. So the information I'm going to tell it is that at this point in time, these are the same movement techniques. You know, you use the command and option to rotate the canvas. It's the same thing in 3D. Command and option, and then click and drag to move around. So at this point in time, it will have rotated right kind of up here. And at this point in time, oh, actually that's kind of smooth. Yeah, maybe not that. I don't know if I like that one. Yeah, that's not too bad. So I can see I've got a little bit of rotate there. I might take that out, but it's only because it's trying to get to this trajectory. So I might change its resting point. So I might say, actually, yeah, your resting point is a little bit higher up, so that movement's not as dramatic. So I've got, yeah, just a little bit of movement. And if I want to as well, because I'm on a three-dimensional axis, I can take that last point, that little, I don't want to mess this up. Yeah, that little last marker there, this one, and actually push that back on a z-axis, and take this one, push this one back. And if I just flex around, can you see what's happening here? We're actually creating a movement that is moving in a three-dimensional space. So it's not just swimming side to side, it's actually moving backwards into the shot. To see that in real time, preview my camera up here, and what we'll actually see is that as the squid moves, it gets ever so slightly smaller. Can you see how it moves away? So we're actually now animating a two-dimensional object in a three-dimensional space. And these are all separate. Yeah. Just wait until we get into the really complex stuff. This is a great way, because now you can just make things three-dimensional. Like if you want two characters walking along, one walks in front of another, you could just put one in front of another. Like you can just physically alter where they sit in a 3D space. Yeah, if you want a bouncing ball to bounce into the distance, fire it into the distance and it will get smaller in the shot, and you don't have to worry about faking things, because we do it in drawn animation all the time. We fake scale, like we draw it smaller to make it look like it gets further away, or we move it upward in the composition. We don't need to do that in Harmony. You can just move something into the distance. You just have to get into that practice. But the big difference I wanted to show everyone today is between that flat drawn animation, that's fast, and you can do really cool, very organic, natural looking 2D animation. But the hybrid animation can still look drawn, but it's got like a million gadgets behind it that allow you to do a bit more. Okay, so this is all I'm going to show everyone for today, because I want to give you some time to digest and keep animating your tentacles and get a bit of movement in there. When we come back after Easter, I'm going to show you how to do deformation rigging. So this is how to do, I hate the term puppet animation because I don't think it is puppet animation. The best way to think about it is like character animation in Maya, but in 2D. So so we build something, we rig it, and then we bring it to life, and we put bones into it, we put curved joints into it, mesh deformers into it as well, and we can actually like move it around. We're going to do a squid again. We're going to do squid 3. The third years did the squid this morning as well. The third squid 3 this morning, and they did their deformation rigs. And then right at the end of the session, I broke the rig, and I was like, oh, I can't believe it, I broke it. But yeah, so that's the plan. Save your work, keep like kind of playing and experimenting with it, and let me know how you get on. And I shall stop the recording there. Session 1 recordings are available online already, because I've emailed you all. Session 2